Why the H3 Leftovers podcast will never return by North Star Radio.
In 2021, Hasan Piker.
That's very patronizing.
Yeah, I am being patronizing. I don't know who the Hold on. You are, and you're over here chirping all the way from London about Palestine.
The biggest political Twitch streamer on the platform was blowing up in popularity, thanks in large part to his coverage of the 2020 presidential election following his controversial departure from the Young Turks.
America deserved 9/11, dude. I'm saying it.
At the same time, Ethan Klein.
Yay!
What?
What a nacho gone with extra beef, extra cheese.
Okay.
Host of the biggest live podcast in the United States, was also blowing up in popularity, thanks in large part to Trisha Paytas and the falling out of their friendship, as well as their incredibly popular yet controversial podcast, Frenemies.
Ela says, don't talk about me on the podcast. All I said was, you should have the guest. He's like, we can't mention Ela. She doesn't want me to talk about, oh, she's too good for a podcast, even though we were talked about. They never once consulted me at the beginning of the spring. She has a podcast. I brought life to the nature.
Given the increased popularity of left-wing politics at the time, after the grand finale ending of the Trump presidency, these two controversial chronically online men decided to team up once and for all to bring to the internet the greatest political podcast of all time, that being the H3 Leftovers podcast.
That's right.
Years went by, delivering to knowledge-hungry young people the tools they need to build a better future for themselves and their communities. But this all came to a screeching halt when one catastrophic event took place in historic Palestine on October the 7th, sparking hours upon hours of what at first seemed to be productive discussion, but what soon turned into quite childish one-sided debate.
If people are mad about that, it's probably because of the timing.
There's no timing placed on a group of people's emancipation. There's no, like,
Bro, their timing matters. It's just this one point I'm trying to make. You can't cheer on Hamas, dude.
The flames grew higher and higher until it was eventually too much for Ethan Klein, causing the Leftovers podcast to fall off the face of the earth with seemingly no announcement. This is what happened to the Leftovers podcast. And this is why the Leftovers podcast will never return.
I think it's kind of funny to see like an effort post from a leftist about like a podcast that I was a part of. You know what I mean? I rarely ever have HasanAbi heads that make like effort posts in general. He did it like a true crime video. It feels weird. They said they were
Today's
ashamed.
broadcast is brought to you by viewers like you. Become a member today and unlock exclusive content at patreon.com/NorthstarRadio. Going back all the way to the beginning of the H3 podcast, politics was always being discussed.
He called you and Ethan terminally online. I mean, he's not wrong. Also, I think North Star is a really interesting subject because he's a great content creator in and of himself, like as a standalone content creator. But I find it really funny. That I think he like became a fan of mine because he watched me watched me talk to Ethan the first time Ethan ever had me on his podcast before Leftovers. Dude, absolutely wild. You're about to talk about Ethan and Leftovers right now. I feel like you never mentioned him, or since it ended, I'm kind of in disbelief right now. The reason why I choose not to talk about like Ethan or Leftovers or anything like that is because I think it instills a lot of parasocial emotions in a lot of people. And that level of parasocial behavior ends up being unproductive because there's no, like, people literally fucking bring up Ethan when I'm talking about Israel Palestine, when in my assessment he is not even meeting the standard of like a content creator who's like across the board against most of the things I believe in. Okay, I personally don't even care if he's like calling me out or whatever. I heard that like people were saying that Ethan talked about me on his podcast today or some shit like that. I don't care. I genuinely don't care. For me, you know what I do care about? Ethan considering what Israel's doing to be genocidal far before October 7th. I do care about that. I think that matters, especially when he is so close to the subject matter, so close to the different aspects of social conditioning that play a pretty prominent role in the development of American Jews, who are very progressive people overall. I don't care. In no matter what he says about me, my community, or my mods, I still firmly believe, okay? I still firmly believe that regardless of everything else, regardless of how he's responded to people yelling at him online, regardless of all of that, I place a lot more emphasis and a lot more value on those things that he has said. Because when people say like, oh, he's being Islamophobic. Yes, there are definitely instances where he said things that are Islamophobic. Okay, both in the past and even recently. I think you guys forget that I myself am also Muslim. So when he does that, it's not like a dehumanization that doesn't feature me at all. It does. It ultimately doesn't change this dynamic. It ultimately doesn't change my understanding of the situation. He's also going after Frogan, though, right now. Just don't get upset when H3 Dorks brigade this channel after reacting to this. Well, what's really interesting about that is that I think his community is probably more pro-Palestine than even he might be. I think there's probably other people from different communities that have presented themselves as like lifelong fans of Ethan. But I think he has a very large audience of very progressive young people. Okay. And as a person with a massive audience of very progressive young people, there are probably a lot of people who are more, I would say, more in favor of, not to say like he's more pro-Palestine than he is. I don't know how to communicate this. Like, I think his audience probably is more at odds with him on this issue than he suspects. I suspect that given that he is a content creator who's been around for a very long time, there are probably old fans who fell out of favor, then came back into the community that are presenting themselves as like diehard H3 heads in an effort to probably say like, no, we're with you. It's great. Keep doing what you're doing. That's it. It's always been about trying to manage like the outside forces that were desperately trying to work in an effort to separate both me and Ethan. But ultimately, it doesn't matter. There was a disagreement for sure. You know?
Jordan Peterson came on the podcast 2 times in the early days of his rise to fame.
You guys know who Jordan Peterson is? He's like a psychologist or something, but he's
a scholar.
He's a scholar.
He's a really smart guy.
It's a very strange story in many ways because Hitler was obsessed with order and cleanliness. He was a very orderly person. He was very sensitive to disgust, because you think, well, the Nazis were afraid of the Jews.
This entire drama fest started because Destiny viewers tried to pit your viewers and Ethan and his viewers against each other. It worked. They continue to do this every day. And this chat constantly falls to debate. Yeah, exactly. And it is also because there is a real, genuine parasocial desire from people who consume a lot of this content, whether it be just Ethan or myself or both, to like constantly cover a issue of real geopolitical significance, an issue of genocide, but from this incredibly narrow framing of like, what does this content creator think about this other content creator? As I always say, drama makes boring subject matter incredibly consumable. Okay? And that's precisely the reason why people like randomly will bring up Ethan, which I think is like not only unproductive, but stupid as fuck. Like, I don't give a shit. Ethan's so fucking woke on certain issues that he did things that I wouldn't have done, like deleting the Jordan Peterson videos, unless he like felt embarrassed by it, which is a, different thing, but I think it's silly.
Because they were other, and that's not right. What's more accurate is that, especially Hitler, he was very sensitive to disgust. That's what it looks like. If you're disgusted by something, then you want to eradicate it. Right? If you're afraid of something, you want to run away.
Just watch the video.
Away from it. If you're disgusted by it, you want to burn it to the damn ground. You want to get rid of it.
Andrew Yang came on the podcast 2 times in the early days of his rise to fame. And in the post-Trisha Paytas timeline of the H3 podcast, political discussion shifted drastically to a more supportive, inclusive understanding of the ever-changing world.
I like both you and Ethan. It's tough to watch. See, this is also the other thing that I didn't want, which was like chatters coming in here to like spark drama. There are certain things that I will not abide by. If you come in here and say, I wish you control your audience more against the anti-Semitism, is completely unacceptable. You're being disrespectful to me, and you're being disrespectful to the thousands of Jewish members in this community that are prominent members of this community for many, many fucking years. Anti-Semitism is completely abhorrent and completely unacceptable. And there's never been a moment where I've ever allowed anti-Semitism.
World around us.
This guy is the peace and love guy.
There's no such thing as trans people. That's something that you created. So have fun with your little dreamland. But that's just not.
By the way, this is why I also say like Ethan is not going to fucking become a right winger or whatever. Look at him. He's like shitting on Nick Merckx for his like obvious anti-trans takes. Like he's pro-trans.
Real.
Take it from me, a dude who's never known a gay person.
Penis, dude. Vagina, girl. Done.
Slam dunk.
Come in here with that fucking train.
We got him again. Slam dunk. Penis, vagina. Boom, boom.
But it wasn't until one fateful day when Ethan Klein and the H3 podcast decided to dive into the deep end of the online sphere of political commentary. That day was the beginning of the end for Steven Crowder.
Oh, there he is. Oh no, Sam Cedar. What a fucking nightmare.
But before this was released on the H3 podcast channel, 10 months after Hasan Piker made his first appearance on the H3 podcast, Ethan Klein made his first ever appearance on the HasanAbi broadcast to promote the release of this once-in-a-lifetime debate.
Boys, girls, Ethan Klein to the H3 podcast.
Are you pretty hyped up on the Crowder?
Oh my God, I'm so hyped up, dude. I'm so excited. Are you wearing holsters right now?
Yeah, yes. We're all wearing holsters.
Now, was the debate any good? Not really. They certainly got Steven Crowder to admit to quite a bit, like running away from past debates with Sam Cedar.
You're so clever. I had no idea that you were taking your show off early last time coming in today.
He admitted that he followed the show last week.
We got him.
He admitted that he watched the show last week.
We got him. Dude, we played him so hard because he literally was following. He saw that you went live, dude. We got him.
Oh my God. We nailed him.
But most of the debate was pretty anticlimactic.
I have a general
This is a
rule.
great opportunity.
I don't start a debate based with people on a lie. And how about you get
sabotaging?
How about you get
Steven,
to
show yourself, you coward. Steven, show yourself. Don't show your co-host.
Ethan, you should show yourself.
Ethan, how can you respect yourself as a man, brother?
Steven, you are such a coward. Stop showing your little leprechaun co-host who comes out dressed like your sidekick.
Come on, Ethan, why do you have to bring on
Show Steven.
Despite the debate's disorderly nature, it sparked something in the mind of Ethan. A yearning, a craving. He had one tiny droplet of debate pervertry, and he couldn't go back.
Oh, God. You look back on these clips with sadness or joy, kind of reminds me of looking back at photos of friends I'm no longer associated with, and it just feels like a massive void. No, I don't. No, dude, I'm happy. Listen, instead of being sad that something ended, why not be happy that it happened to begin with? You know, that's the way I look at it. It's like the DNC. Listen, I never in a million years would ever think that I would become one of the largest content creators on any platform, okay? As a political commentator who has opinions that are completely outside of what is considered normal and good in American political discourse, I never thought that I would get to this position. So I don't take that shit for granted at all, okay? I'm very fortunate. I talk about it all the time. I probably should talk about it more frequently, to be honest. Like, I have a place that I can go to every single fucking day, okay? A community of like-minded individuals who don't fuck around, who don't actually allow any kind of like serious infractions against marginalized communities at all. Like, this kind of stuff I never would have imagined it. I became a content creator in an era where there was nothing like this, okay? You had Sam Cedar, you had the Young Turks, which is kind of funny to bring back now. You had Democracy Now!, you had like Some Air America, okay? There was nothing. The entire online commentary field was captured in completely by right-wing commentators. Many people were either center-right or just straight up fucking Nazis, okay? Literal Nazis. Now, some of them still exist. Some of the literal Nazis still exist. But like overall, overall, there was a very, very, very little. There was very little space for people who were like immediately hostile to this kind of sentiment, to like leftist attitudes, progressive attitudes, to social democracy even. So because I remember that shit, and I remember how fucking isolating that felt, and how shitty that felt to get constant death threats and you know, doxing and a litany of other like, you know, clip chimpers and whatnot. Like even back then, yeah, I'm incredibly fortunate to be in this position. And so, yeah, I don't think that this is, you know, I remember this fondly, you know, because it's not something that I would have ever expected. That's also part of the reason why I place a lot of value in people who have personally had an attitude change, who like recognize the errors in the way that they were thinking or the way that they were operating as content creators in the past, who like used to move a certain way and now and have now dramatically shifted away from that. Like that's why I hype up Ethan and hyped up Ethan quite a bit as well. Because like regardless of what he had done in the past, like he is a person who truly changed. And I do believe it. I think that was legitimate. I think that was genuine. A lot of people try to ascribe like cynical motives to people doing things like that, where it's like, oh, he couldn't be edgy anymore, that's why he did it. Like, I don't think so. I think it was a genuine change of heart. If someone is capable of experiencing that level of growth on their own, especially as a content creator, when they could have very easily probably continued doing exactly the type of shit that they were doing and also keep farming, you know, the right as much as they wanted to, then yeah, I'm going to think about that differently. Like it changes the calculation a lot.
Day and night, week after week, Ethan Klein was not only debating the greatest of the great, but was winning in said debate.
No, I think it's more so for women pick violent men more than men pick violent women.
Based on what? Do you feel that sometimes you argue from emotion rather than like concrete facts? I feel this to be true. Do you feel you do that a lot or no?
I'm a woman, so sometimes, yeah.
Okay. Interesting defense.
You're done with that shit? Can we talk like adults now or not?
I think this...
Hey, I just got here. This video is low-key parasocial, and I apologize beforehand. Wait, is this North Star? Is North Star Comrade Casey? Oh, it is. Damn, dog. You're going to apologize for making a parasocial-ass video? That's crazy.
This conversation has kind of been exhausted.
People would rather watch me full screen cam do the worm
than
watch your prime...
Bro, do it for a week. Do a week of no reaction content and see how many views you get. Oh, he's crying in the corner.
No, he's not. He's not crying in the corner, Ethan. He is deploying the most powerful counter debate tactic known to man. That's right. I want you to see it for all of its glory. That is, ladies and gentlemen, the worm. Absolute cinema peak. Okay? No one has ever so thoroughly destroyed another interlocutor in the marketplace of ideas before or after this, okay? This caused a worldwide shift in the way that people even analyze or internalize debates.
Okay, sure.
He went up against world-class greats. People like a 20-year-old dropshipper.
I'm just trying to flex on you
But
guys. I'm trying
why?
to show you guys what's up.
A printer salesman.
All day when you need a printer.
A character from the Asian version of Get Out.
I identify as Korean.
A Quebecois.
A carrot.
And even a man from the Nexium cult.
I got on the bus and they made an announcement about my Tourette syndrome. And earlier in line, a lady had heard me saying some inappropriate words. And she stood up and she said, well, how come he can say this word?
Okay, that one was actually pretty well done.
I have a theory for you.
I'm ready.
Okay, cool. I think you actually fake having Tourette's. Yeah, I think you actually don't have it. Here's my
Austin was wild for that day. Austin just walked in, by the way.
Let me just break it down. I think this is kind of a funny thing.
He
I
just
doubt
looks
this
like
is what
you,
happened.
this-
But maybe
this
you're just
sex
on.
cult
Maybe you
guy.
just called someone the N-word on the bus, and then you're like, "Oh
Yeah.
no, I have Tourette's." As somebody with Tourette's, I actually have Tourette's. I know it's not curable, so I just find that claim to be absolutely a pseudoscientific, crazy claim that has no backing in science or at all. And I think you're actually. In my opinion, as someone with Tourette's, I think you're scamming people.
Did you say that you have Tourette's?
I do have Tourette's.
I didn't
Isn't
know
that crazy. Yeah, I know. That's why I was so surprised when you emailed me, because I was like, I have Tourette's. And what's
This is Ethan at
interesting
his
too,
peak.
I've also talked about how much I hate Keith and Nexium and what a psycho he is. So when I got your email, I was like, this is incredible. And I could totally see how it is you fell into a cult, because you clearly don't do any research.
Mind you, this was all taking place in the same timeline of the Leftovers podcast. They began the show on September 26, 2021, and Hasan Piker, but I'll call him Piker, seemed a bit uncomfortable at first, just getting the feel of the room and his ability to speak at will. This also wasn't a brand new podcast, rather a brand new show on an already existing podcast, so it makes sense it'd be a little challenging for Hasan Piker to just jump right in. But after only a few episodes, everything was perfect. I had already been radicalized by Hasan in 2019 and 2020, but the partnership of my two favorite creators only grew my passion for politics even more. So during this time, Ethan and Hasan are becoming best buds. They do a weekly show together. Ethan comes on the HasanAbi broadcast again. Hasan visits the H3 podcast again to help in the interview of Liver King. And during this time, Ethan is participating in debate after debate. And Hasan is watching these debates on his stream, supporting Ethan in his performance as friends do. Hasan would even text Ethan talking points during the debates.
This is from last year. It says, "What the F is happening with gay people? 10 years ago, everyone called them F words, the F slur for gay people in high school. And today, 1 in 6 high schoolers claim to be gay."
1 in 6. So yeah, it's continuing. More and more people.
So do you miss the days when we could call gay people the F word?
No, I just think it's surprising. I think it's crazy that that's happened. It's been such a popular trend lately.
Yeah, but that's not true either, is it?
No, it is.
What's your data?
My cousins that are in high school. I've talked to my cousins in high school. I've talked to strangers. People liked that video and commented on it and said the same thing.
Oh, that's data. Never mind. Ethan got to bust out the left-handed. The number of people who are left-handed.
The amount of left-handed people back in the day was really low.
I sent it back.
People left-handed were seen as inferior, and they were forced to use their right hand more often. But as it became more acceptable and people realized left-handed people weren't demons, then the amount of left-handed people increased, and it became steady at what, like 10% or something?
12%.
12% is left-handed. It went up astronomically all of a sudden. Would you say people choose to be left-handed?
I don't know. I don't know anything about it.
Yeah, but that'd be silly. Why would you?
You don't know anything about anything, and yet you still chirp on it. Why not chirp on this too?
But little did Hasan know, he was feeding the thing that would eat him.
I don't know if it's like that. I don't think it's like that.
He was flying too close to the debate pervertry's sun, and all of a sudden, seemingly out of nowhere, Ethan, sitting there with a very large debate ego, turned around to face towards Hasan and said,
"Allow me to debate the master."
2 months before the abrupt ending of the Leftovers podcast, Ethan Klein was having some moral quandaries about his devotion for capitalism, where he enjoyed the freedom that came from capitalism, the ability to succeed from nothing that came from capitalism, but was disheartened by the inequality that capitalism fosters.
I know that I'm a capitalist, so I've been trying to think, like, how do you square that with my other, like, socialist ideas? Like, I think the government should have guaranteed jobs for people that want to work, that pay enough for the minimum amount needed to have shelter and food. First of all, I think it's like the natural inclination of some people. Like, I don't think it's even realistic to say, I want to live in like a perfect communistic society, because that just doesn't work. It's antithetical to human nature. But I do think there are good things of capitalism provides, which is, I do think there's a sense of innovation that happens when people are motivated by money and pushed to, do certain ideas. I don't hate the idea of like people who can be successful. I think it's good. I think that capitalism is a more realistic system of government.
It's Because he's a dangist. Socialism is not about poverty. To be rich is to be glorious. Ethan Shao, he's a dangist, dude. To be rich is to be glorious.
Governance than like fucking communism is, you know. Communism never works because people are inherently corrupt, and whoever's in charge is they're gonna be greedy, they're gonna be corrupt, they're gonna fuck everything up. It doesn't make sense. Like, it's almost like weird virtue signaling to be like, I'm living in modern day America, but I want a full communist revolution. I'll take on humanity, dude. I am a capitalist. What do you want? You know what I mean?
Yeah,
and I think but the thing is, like, they think that like workers should share in the workers should get a percent of your earnings, essentially, a percentage of their production. I don't agree with that. You're watching a capitalist pig deal with it. You guys are all like radical communists. There's that many radical communists.
They're not radical communists. Not everybody that's anti-capitalist is a communist.
It is kind of a radical take, that being.
So this is like, I think this should be a pretty good indication of like Ethan's community, at least like those who are chatting in his chat. Because it's not like I was watching him during this, or it's not like I was streaming during this. I mean, it's not like I wasn't streaming during this. Like, I was probably doing, at the same time as this was happening, I was probably streaming my own shit. You know what I mean? Like these are his own fans, right? Like, these are, my point is, there's a lot of people who don't agree with Ethan on certain issues that still enjoy his content. And that's perfectly valid, you know? Yes, you were, and people were timed out. Yeah, I'm sure. Because usually what we do is, like, when people are like, Ethan's talking about socialism or whatever, I'm sure people were probably coming here to get me to like cover it or whatever. And I was like, not really inclined to do so because I was probably doing some other shit. That was actually a big part. There was a lot of people back in the day that would be like cross-pollinating both streams, where they'd be like watching Ethan and then would come in here to be like, oh, Ethan's talking about this, like, cover it now. And I was like, no, I don't, you know, I'm not going to do that right now. I'm like talking about the news or some other boring shit. Okay. Like, I can't speak to what is inside of Ethan's mind beyond what he has said. And I did always get the feeling that he thought that like I was egging on his own community to like hate him. You know what I mean? And I wasn't. Not only was I not, but I was getting yelled at by my own community for not, in their assessment, adequately addressing his takes with the same passion and fervor that I would address anyone else that I don't know if they were chirping in a similar capacity. You were far more mad at us than him at the time. Yeah, no, for sure. I was because I thought you guys were being ridiculous. I still yell at people when people come in here to be like, Ethan said this, Ethan said that. It's like, it's, for me, like, it doesn't really matter necessarily, because once someone ultimately is like 90% there, right? If there are personal hangups, or if they have like a personal association with the subject matter, and I can't like get over that hump overall on a single issue, I'm not just going to fucking, like, I'm not going to hold them to the same standard as some like random guy I don't know, whose opinions I'm not fully familiar with, that I don't know how they arrived at those positions. Okay. And for me, the way I see Ethan is like, the way I saw Ethan back then and the way I still see Ethan is like, I think he's a passionate guy who sometimes has a capacity to fly off the handle a little bit. That's why he's got the button, right? And that in the heated moment, he says a bunch of stuff, and he will sometimes even repeat these things, but ultimately, as far as I can tell, his heart is in the right place. Like when he said you're fostering a community of anti-Semites, yeah, I don't agree with that. Like, I think that's I mean, it's hurtful. It's completely untrue And it sucks to hear, but it is what it is, you know?
And it's like full anti-capitalist. I mean, you're essentially advocating to change the entire structure of all societies today on Earth. That's not radical?
Do you think democracy is a good thing? And do you think democracy is what helps prevent?
Yeah, but obviously our democracy isn't perfect either.
Right.
You know.
But you think ultimately that being a democracy, living in a society that votes and has, you know, the people agree on how we should, who should represent us and who should lead us is something like that's a better system than like say China, right? Where they have a council of elites and somebody is elected from within, right?
Yes.
Okay, so what if we ran companies that way?
On the following Wednesday episode of the H3 podcast.
That's the other side of this is that like there are a lot of people that work there that don't necessarily agree with him either. And he like the very fact that he trusts everyone in his production team, include especially Dan, regardless of their difference in opinion, I think it also is, you know, it's another reason why I'm 100% confident that he would not, like, he wouldn't do like a right heel turn. Like, y'all are fucking crazy.
Ethan once again brings up the capitalism discussion, stating that he's been thinking a lot about it and is looking forward.
Do you view the H3 like your Uncle Jank when he talks about crime? Is this a similar situation? You know what? That's actually a really good analogy. Obviously, Jank is my uncle. There's an uncle-nephew bond that is unshakable, unbroken. You know what I mean? I think it was, what are you going to do? Not fucking love your family? Like, that's insane. I'm sure there are plenty of people who have parted ways with their families, but it probably goes a lot beyond like political disagreements. You know what I mean? And I'm not saying that I would love my uncle if he was a Nazi. I think that would be a bridge too far. But, you know, yeah, I don't agree. I don't agree with Jank on the issue of, I don't agree with Jank when he fucking believes that like Venezuelan gangs are overtaking Aurora, Colorado apartment complexes. But like, you know, he's still my uncle. I love him. Like that's it, you know? And with Ethan, there's a similarity to that. I mean, obviously, like I don't think Jank is gonna fucking run around being like Hasan has cultivated a community of anti-Semites or some shit like that. That would be weird if he said that. But with Ethan, it's maybe less severe in terms of the familial bond. But yeah, it's a good analog. It's a good way to analyze the situation.
To a further discussion with Hasan on the following Thursday.
Last week was the capitalism versus socialism week. But I have to tell you, I want to talk about it more tomorrow because I've been thinking a lot about it.
Great.
I do. I mean, that's what Thursday is for, right?
That's what Hasan's there for. You can talk about it with him.
Ass grift.
The better analogy might be Anakin's experiences. When it comes to Ethan, it's clear that despite his personal ties to Zionism, his fundamental values have not changed with Anna. There's so many different things that she's turned reactionary towards that it's obvious she's flipped towards the right to some extent. Yeah. I think I would look at the situation differently if I saw Ethan like, not on the issue of Israel-Palestine, but if I saw him like taking like transphobic stances or something, like then I'd be like, okay, maybe it's a little different.
Mr. Dog shit moron motherfucker.
All right, chill, dude. To be clear, I'm not a capitalist. I'm a social democrat.
Okay.
I think that distinction is important because people lose their fucking mind when I say like, I'm a capitalist. They just think that I'm like some fat cigar smoking boot on the worker's face, grind him into dust. You know what I mean? I'm a social democrat, motherfuckers. Recognize, bitch. But actually, I am looking forward to tomorrow because I have been thinking about it quite a bit.
Going into the discussion, Ethan had one overarching question.
What is it that social democracy can't achieve that socialism can? That's my question.
Okay. Let's talk about it tomorrow.
Yeah, we'll talk about it tomorrow.
Now, does Ethan actually want the answer to this question? Does he actually want to learn? Or does he simply already have an opinion on the subject he is willing to argue for hours? Yes. Ethan prefaces the discussion.
In the case of Ethan, it follows from being an Israeli, being propagandized, and having family living there. What happened to your uncle? Did he adopted shitty positions? Dude, great question. I think he just like saw too many homeless people and his brain broke. Like literally. That's just, he saw like the homeless lady with the fucking katana was a bridge too far for him. I think he just like, he snapped. Like he saw that and was like, nope, nope, I'm done. Like that's, I think that's what it is. Plus he's old. Like he's like 50, you know, come on. This guy keeps asking me questions, or there's like a bunch of people asking me questions about like Latin American leaders, man. I'm not going to answer that right now.
By saying he's excited for the conversation, as he's been doing a lot of research. That research being talking to ChatGPT.
I want to better represent my position because I don't really know a lot, and I feel like I've done a lot of research in the week following.
Let the conversation
So,
what did you do? What did you read? What kind of research did you do?
I had a very in-depth conversation with ChatGPT.
Respect. Okay. That's good.
I asked it really kind of.
Well, Ben Shapiro thinks it's socialist, like ChatGPT socialist. So like ChatGPT probably Lenin.
Right,
yeah.
ChatGPT keeps it so real. You don't even know.
ChatGPT Lenin pilled you.
They focus this discussion on a few distinct questions or quandaries Ethan is having with capitalism, and he's not as willing to learn as he originally made it seem.
And the labor class still
like
exists.
That's an assumption. I don't know that that's true.
They first discuss his overarching question. What can socialism achieve that social democracy cannot?
So let's talk about this. Now, my first question is this. Given that, you know, in a social democracy, we can regulate things like taxes, housing, higher education, sharing jobs, and all this kind of stuff, what are the problems in social democracy that we need socialism to address?
So social democracy is still capitalist with you know, serious, severe market regulations, right?
Mm-hmm.
The issue is twofold. One, social democracies don't address some of the domestic problems because when there's still capital accumulation.
So which domestic problems?
Domestic problems such as labor issues, homelessness, like there's no way to fully eradicate that because the inherent class contradiction between the owner class and the labor class still exists.
That's an assumption. I don't know that that's true. That there's just going to be, there's not going to be homelessness in socialism, but there will in social democracy.
Well, the idea is that completely abolishing the profit motive in certain commodities like housing, for example, will address that problem because then you're making housing specifically for need rather than so you can make money off of existing units.
But we acknowledge that in a social democracy, that's...
I think one of the craziest parts about this conversation was that there were, again, charlatans who we know are fans of goblin porn, okay, who tried to make it seem like I didn't do a good enough job explaining certain subjects to a person who was like being, you know, somewhat contentious under the guise of curiosity. Okay. And that is like one of the most annoying things because a lot of people don't actually just like look at a thing and let it sit and just analyze it with their own opinions. And they need someone to handhold them through this process. This has happened a couple different instances in my political career. Like when I talked to what's his face? The fucking Herschel Walker's son, Christian Walker, about transphobia. And obviously these are not the same. Like Ethan and Christian Walker are nowhere near the same. Like their level of curiosity and their charitability is you know, not even on the same orbit, right? Christian Walker was deliberately trying to be transphobic. Ethan here is definitely still curious about my position. And there's a level of respect. But with Christian Walker, when I dealt with him and I talked about how, like, you know, you're being crazy for, you know, this hyper focusing this much on like trans girls playing sports or whatever. A lot of people were like, why didn't you, you know, dive into the data? Why didn't you do this? Why didn't you do that? Because I think that the way I dealt with it was a significantly better way, which now a lot of people also champion that position. Now that Tim Walz says they're being weird, for example, they're like, oh, it's so brilliant when Tim Walz says it. Just remember, Being a real leftist is sometimes about being right just too early. And that in the future, if you were duped by other content creators in the way that they analyze certain situations and you came in here to repeat those talking points because you thought you would come across brilliant, maybe don't do that.
To run, ideally, the homeless and whoever else needs a home for whatever reason would be provided one. So I don't understand what socialism does better in that case.
At the end of the day, these countries, the social democracies that we were talking about, still have a lot of wealthy individuals, a lot of people who are making money off of finance capital and capitalism in general. And their interests are always going to be to further erode the welfare state as best as they possibly can in an effort to claw back all of those areas that they could still technically
you're
privatize.
Putting that on them, but that's not, if you have a strong social democracy, that wouldn't be possible.
Ethan then asks another.
That's not true. And that is happening in Europe. All around Europe, where when there was a counterbalance like the USSR, when capital owners were truly afraid of too much labor momentum turning the tide of capital, they actually made concessions to allow the welfare state to exist. But now that there is no USSR, now that there is no counterbalance, look at all the European states. They've lost so many aspects of their welfare state. People have become increasingly more reactionary. Fascist ideology is rising, and inevitably, no matter what happens, there's always going to be that push and pull. There's no like middle ground on this subject, unfortunately. As long as capital exists, it will always be a parasitic force that tries to claw back as much power as it physically can get. And historically, this is precisely what has happened in Europe. If you look at certain aspects of even the medical system being purposely crippled, purposely underfunded in the UK. You have a national healthcare system in the UK, and the NHS has been purposely defunded by politicians that are backed by corporate interests in an effort to inevitably privatize certain aspects of that system. People get upset, people get increasingly more mad at the way things are, and they have no way, and both parties are obviously captured. Both major parties are obviously captured by capital interests, whether it be the Labour Party, who are basically light Tories, or the Tory Party, and then they turn around and inevitably bring in an era of privatization. It's happening in Canada as well. Scandinavian countries had decades-long socked them concentrated political power monopoly, and these states are now being crippled by austerity and privatization. Yeah, exactly. Olof Palme, baby. Regime enjoyers in Sweden. Look at where they're at now.
Another question he's quite unwilling to hear the answer to. Are workers still being exploited if all their needs in housing, food, and healthcare are being met?
Worker exploitation seems to be at the heart of socialism and communism. Yes. And so I want to ask you this question. If an employee is fairly compensated, and by fairly I mean factors like work, compensation, they're being paid well beyond the means of living. If they're provided in all those ways that we see as important, is that still exploitation?
In the Marxist perspective, under Marxian economics, Marxist theory, exploitation is not a good or bad thing. It is just a thing that happens.
Okay.
And it goes back to something I've described many, many times over. There are two classes. There is the labor class, the wage laborers, the proletariat, and the bourgeois class, the capital owning class, right? Mm-hmm. And these two classes have two inherently contradictory interests. As someone who worked, you wanted to work the least amount of hours for the most amount of pay. Your boss, on the other hand, wants you to work the most amount of hours for the least amount of pay. This inherent contradiction is at the heart of capitalism and is how commodities are produced under a capitalist mode of production. When you have this imbalance, those who do have capital end up always being able to pay you much less than your actual output.
So that is what's happening now. So is it still exploitation of workers if they're fairly provided for?
Yes.
Because there is no fairness in that situation. If you are not getting back the surplus value that you have created, or you have no democratic means of changing the way that your surplus labor value is being spent, then it is still exploitation under a Marxian understanding of exploitation. That's simply what it is. profit is exploitation. Now, if you consider that to be good or bad, that's when things get tricky. If you consider that exploitation to be fair, that level of exploitation of what happens with your surplus labor value, if you consider that to be fair, then you are probably not a Marxist. The assessment of fairness in this circumstance is actually a loaded premise. Probably should have dealt with that a little bit better when Ethan brought that up in terms of like being a pure debate pervert.
Because the fairness in this regard is not met on the metrics of like living standards, but instead on the metrics of what their output is.
If the employee is extremely satisfied, and they feel well provided for, who are you to tell him he's being exploited?
Ethan continues in his failure to learn and brings up a similar question in the field of workers' rights. Why should workers be given democracy in the workplace in the form of decision making and profit sharing when they themselves did not create the business?
Would it be exploitation if all the revenue minus its expenses was distributed evenly through the workplace? Wait, first of all, distributed evenly? Like, no one is talking about even distribution here. I just want everybody to understand Marxism is not egalitarian. Marxism is not about like offering every single person the same exact amount of money or the same exact compensation. It's about having the same say in the process at the least. There is no world in which every single person is going to be doing an equal amount of work and contribute an equal amount of output. Okay? There's like some people might do that. I do that with my podcast, as you guys know, but that's not inherently Marxist. It's just, you know, it's a different way of organizing. It's a cooperative corporation. But yes, each according to their ability and each according to their needs does not mean like everyone on a basketball team gets to make the same amount of points and no one actually wins or anything like that. That's not how this works at all. How do employee-owned companies fit into this? That's a great question. I mean, every single company works differently, but in terms of the way that profits are distributed after your base wage pay is given to you, in like depending on how much revenue the company has generated, you get to have a say in the process of how that revenue is distributed. Sometimes it might be we get all of the revenue and it's distributed amongst different groups within the organization. Like, you know, 20% goes to the janitor staff, 20% goes to the executive staff, 30% goes to the executive staff. But it's all about having a say in that process. It's all about having a genuine ownership stake in the company. Just mentioned Star Trek. Not everyone's the captain. You still need the mechanics. Exactly. And it does not mean that the captain and the mechanics are going to be paid the exact same either. Well, Star Trek is technically communist, so there is not really... They've moved beyond the need for money in their society. My dry cleaner uses profit to open stores and increase intake while keeping the workload on the fewest people. Yep. At my work, we have town hall meetings. They talk quarterly forecasts, blah, blah, blah. They basically dictate what's going on. In my optimal company, we go to that town hall meeting and each employee has an agenda card and we vote on a set of issues. Yes. The irony is capitalist corporations have a semblance of that. What you just described is quite literally a capitalist corporation, which is authoritarian in nature, making it seem like you have a say in the actual output of the company, making it seem like you have a say in the fucking process. So they know how this is done. They have the capacity to run it that way. They just don't want to give you the share. They don't want to give you the vote. They don't want to give you the opportunity to make demands. Because why? Because those demands would eat away at the share of profits that those at the tippy top get to dictate what to do with.
Business.
I want to give you a specific example because this is interesting to me. Let's just take this workplace as an example because we're all familiar with it. I started my career 10 plus years ago and I was successful.
I also don't personally know like what the best use case for like Marxian economists works in a global marketplace. Like I'll be the first to admit that. You know what I mean? I try to do right. I do understand that like ultimately considering that this is a capitalist global marketplace, like you have to rely on the magnanimous nature of a boss in that regard. And I would be the boss in this situation. I don't know if there is like a mathematical equation that gives you the perfect number, the perfect dollar value.
Well, by myself with 0 employees. I made a lot of money.
Because there's someone in the labor theory of value still applicable in a service-based economy follow-up. If it is, is like a recession year. Are employees in a socialist system obligated to pay you above the revenue generated by your labor, even if the value brought in by your labor nets you below living wage, such as in a bad recession year? Exactly. But I do know that like in a recession year, employers in a socialist system are obligated to pay you above the revenue generated by your labor is not correct. Also, the idea is that like you're describing capitalist market conditions ultimately, like in terms of recession years and inflationary shocks.
Did well for myself. And then, 5 years ago into my career, I made the podcast, which obviously you all are watching now. Let's say we go back to 5 years ago when I hired Dan as a freelance. You started as like a consultant.
Yeah, or a freelancer. Yeah.
And obviously you moved to full time, and I'll get to that. So he started as like a freelance consultant. What would be a fair way of compensating him for that?
And when Hasan gives him an answer, Ethan no longer wants to talk about it.
I just want to know how the socialist workplace works. It seems so nebulous when you talk about it.
Why is it? I don't think it's nebulous at all.
There's gotta be. Okay,
I have a living, breathing, working example of it that I've given you.
I know, but like, there's got to be like a constitution that says outlines, or I don't know, whatever the fuck you want to write, right? There's got to be something, and it says like, or rule laws that says, this is the minimum that a person should get from the company.
Yes. And it should be married to the output. It should be married to the productive forces. It should be married to the output. That should be pegged.
We talked about this enough, though. I don't want to bore people.
That should be pegged to the performance. And I think that is the best possible way to work.
I guess
For the record, there was a second part of the conversation about social democracies and how they inevitably fail. I gave the first example in domestic inequality, and then I actually expanded on that to talk about the global inequality, which is the over-reliance on exploitation of the third world, of developing nations, the unequal exchange with the global south, and that is obviously the broadest reaching and most consequential aspect of global capitalism. But Ethan did not want to talk about that in that situation. But I think that is like, for those of you who want me to elaborate further, it's something that I talked about quite a bit. It's something that I have talked about quite a bit, rather. But I do often I don't like to talk about it because, this is a nation in the imperial core. Many of you are watching from Western nations, so you do benefit from that. So you are a little bit of a labor arista KKK rat in that regard, which is why I think it gets touchy when people talk about that. I think we're not there yet in terms of our understanding, our class consciousness, in order to invoke class consciousness and a sense of and instill a sense of solidarity among American laborers with respect to, like, the children mining minerals in fucking Congo. There is that as well. People get really touchy about that when they start having to reckon with that reality. What also needs to be mentioned is that Marxism leftist theory do not automatically equate to a more charitable social norms either. This is to say socialism, Marxism will not make people better people. It's an economic structure, not a social one. Marxism can lead to better living outcomes, but it will still produce shitty people. It's about minimizing those people. Exactly. Just like I always say, a lot of people are hurt. Hurt people. If you fucking eliminate one of the major issues that they have in their lives, they are less likely to become unstable. They're less likely to become little freaks that say Haitians are eating cats and dogs. That's why I always say Medicare for all means for all. It includes Nazis as well. The entire goal of systemic change such as this one is to stop more Nazis from existing.
Problem on that is, like, how could you possibly
enforce that?
No, not even enforce. How could you possibly even analyze that? Like, how much more money are we making because the janitor comes?
That's where we go to the Walmart example. That, like, we are already completely aware of that. We have actuaries, we have CPAs that are working in real time, making mathematical equations to figure out exactly what not to pay people, technically, and they could be in a total social reorganization.
This is also the other aspect of this story, which is that there are already pre-existing constructs within a capitalist economy that we use to the advantage of capital, and that could absolutely flip in a moment's notice, almost overnight, if magically capitalism turned into socialism. All of those forces that currently work at the behest of capital would be able to make these same mathematical equations, but this time for workers. So that is I mean, obviously that's not going to happen, but the notion that we have no way of calculating this sort of thing is actually wrong. I think, what is it? The People's Republic of Walmart was the name of the book that dives further into like the command economy and centralization and how it has actually occurred inside of capitalist corporations in a way that like corporations now that have like the same output and the same revenue structure of an entire fucking nation at this point. And therefore we have the tools and we are actually using them. We're just simply not using them at the behest of workers and using them at the behest of the capital owners right now. Like, look at Amazon. You know what I mean? That's an entire fucking nation state in and of itself.
Of the economy with a socialist dogma would work in the opposite direction.
Okay.
It's kind of like this.
Please, let's move to another topic.
Okay,
I don't want to bore people.
All in all, this episode was very entertaining, despite some frustrating moments from Ethan. And it even went an hour longer than usual, given how entertaining and important of a conversation it was. This Leftovers episode was definitely not a contributing factor to the conclusion of the Leftovers podcast, but it definitely was a sneak peek for what's to come. Ethan's debate purgatory ego had reached a point of no return, a final form in which Ethan could not be incorrect. So after a few weeks had passed of some pretty normal episodes of the Leftovers podcast, something catastrophic took place, once again sparking the need for discussion on the Leftovers podcast.
This is CNN Breaking News.
Hello and welcome. I'm Jim Sciutto in Washington. It is now 4 a.m. in Gaza, where Israel is striking back at Hamas targets after these attacks we saw play out over the last 24 hours. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says his country is at war. The militant group launched an unprecedented early morning series of attacks on Israel, firing at least 5,000.
Question, brother, for a social democracy like Norway, how exactly is it exploiting the global south? For example, the Norwegian pension fund is generated primarily through surplus oil revenues. Even further, Norway does not exist in a vacuum. Every commodity that you purchase as a Norwegian person when you go into a Norwegian market is still in some way directly tied to the global economy, and the global economy is capitalist, and therefore, like when you are like Norwegians use iPhones, you know what I mean? It's the simplest example, right? Norwegians use iPhones. Think about the process in which you have to extract natural resources from the global south in an effort to make those iPhones, right? Like just the batteries alone are exactly what I'm talking about in terms of like social democracies still relying heavily on the exploitation of the global south. It's not, and for the record, when I explain this sort of stuff, people get very mad. They're like in their feelings, they're like, what the fuck, you do that too? And it's like, I know. I have this recognition. It is also something that is impossible to avoid. That's why leftists will say there is no ethical consumption under capitalism, because it's just impossible. You cannot exist outside of the grid, right? Let's say you try to exist outside of the grid. You bought an axe at Home Depot. You didn't make the axe yourself. You literally had certain materials inside of that axe that at some point absolutely touched basically slave labor hands. This is why Lenin was absolutely correct when he said imperialism is the final stage of capitalism and is an absolute necessity. Imperialism is a necessity under capitalism because you have to consistently eke out slimmer and slimmer profit margins as profit rates have a tendency to decline. So then you have to look for new markets. And the only way to keep certain markets low enough so that your profits are high enough in the Western world, you have to keep them servile. You have to keep them in shitty conditions. That's why Parenti said, I think it was Parenti who said, Africa is not poor. Africa is rich. You don't rob a poor person. You rob a rich person. Africa has been kept poor because of its immense wealth. Or maybe he said that about South America.
In rockets, Israel says at least 300 Israelis are more than 1,500 wounded. This was not just rocket attacks, though. The terror group overran border.
They are underdeveloped and they're not underdeveloped. They are overexploited.
Crossings invaded by sea, by air, and by land, taking over entire Israeli communities in the south. We must warn you, many of these images are graphic and frightening.
However, leading up to this episode, Ethan has some initial discussion of the October 7 attacks on October 9th.
So over the weekend, Hamas, who is the governing, they're organization, but they're also control Gaza Strip. They somehow managed to put together this surprise invasion of into Israel, and it was horrific. So far, at least 700 Israelis, which is nuts. One of the crazy things was there was a nature party, a peace party, they actually call it, ironically, and I guarantee a lot of people there were pro peace, who are anti. Netanyahu and all that kind of stuff. And so
yeah, for sure, they were all young. Definitely that type of crowd that is unhappy with the government.
The really sad kind of crazy thing is that I don't know if this has changed, but last that I heard, Hamas didn't even know about the party. They just happened upon it.
This discussion was pretty tame, and mostly understandable coming from two Israelis after such a catastrophe took
Ethan
place.
is not even technically Israeli, for the record. I don't think. Like, Ethan went on birthright, no? I don't think he's Israeli.
Ethan even made sure to make his stance clear about the Israeli government. Not by speaking from the heart, but by reading a tweet of a note.
No. He did. He has citizenship. He lived there, but he went on birthright. I think his parents might be, I actually don't even know. Holy shit. I should know this. I know he lived in Israel. Because I remember him talking about like working at a casino and shit.
WhatsApp screenshot from 2021.
You know what? Let me do this. Before I even talk about this, let me just tell you, first of all, just so it's not ambiguous about how I feel about this situation as a whole. Okay? Let me just say this. I tweeted this. I think this was when the IDF blew up some apartment building or some horrific shit in Gaza a few years ago. I said the Israeli government's making me sick. Even if Hamas is operating as civilian buildings, it doesn't justify the total destruction of that building. It's inhumane. Netanyahu's a piece of shit warmonger. It needs to go. As a dual citizen, I love Israel and the Israeli people. They deserve a government that actually believes in peace and not force and violence. The ultra-right Jewish settlers.
It's like saying you're not American because you grew up in Turkey. Come on, dude. No, I didn't know that he had Israeli citizenship. Someone corrected me and said that he does. But like, culturally, like, I don't think Ethan is Israeli culturally. I think Ethan is fucking American. Like, what are we talking about? It also doesn't even fucking matter, honestly. Like, we're not talking about his background. We're talking about what he is saying. Also, this is very important for the record. They're shameless and hateful, fueled by religious zeal and enabled by the Israeli government. Ultra-right Jewish settlers. I wish the settling and repossession land would stop. I wish the bombing in Gaza would stop. Gazans deserve to live in life free of fear. For all the crimes Hamas has committed, we must always remember that they are not Palestine. The Israeli government holds all the power, and it is on them to stop the violence and show a true willingness for peace. So,
settlers among the greatest provocateurs in the world.
This is in
They're
May
shameless,
15, 2021,
hateful,
Chad.
fueled by
Remember
religious
that.
zeal and enabled by the Israeli government. I wish the settling and repossession of Palestinian land would stop. I wish the bombing in Gaza would stop. Gazans deserve to live a life free of fear. For all the crimes Hamas has committed, we must always remember that they are not Palestine. The Israeli government holds all the power and is on them to stop the violence and show a true willingness for peace. Okay.
For the record, like, this right here in May 15, 2021 is like 90% there. You know what I mean? It recognized the humanity of Palestinians. Like, yes, it's not like, it still treats Hamas as like an aberration, as a separate entity, as a like, it doesn't come with the conclusion that like people that are pushed into a corner that feel like they have no way out of that corner were inevitably going to lash back, right? They're inevitably going to fight back to fight their way out of that corner.
Just so it's not unambiguous.
Now, I wouldn't say this discussion was completely tame, as Ethan got quite caught up in the timing of it all, criticizing people for saying free Palestine as the attacks were taking place.
I think what people don't understand when they say that.
Are you making the comparison to the Australian girl because you think Cheddar's calling Ethan a Zionist is the same as her? No, I'm not. I'm using that as an example of like, people yell at me all the fucking time too. There is a level of validity to the criticisms, especially if that's your output, especially if that is what you're communicating to people, people that are outside of my immediate community, mind you. So that's another thing that you have to recognize. This is why I started off the conversation by talking about how there are members in his own community that are completely removed from mine that would much rather watch him than me, that might still have these kinds of opinions. Okay.
That is like what it means to somebody in Israel who's going through grieving right now of so many people around them and their life as it used to be. Nobody knows right now what to expect and how long this war is going to last. Like, when you come out and say free Palestine after they just lost everybody, they have children taken away from them. That's not, if you're really for humanitarian reasons, that's not.
No, like I disagree with this. You know, much love to Gila, but I disagree with this sentiment. Saying free Palestine in that moment it comes with the recognition of all of the things that happened on October 6th, on October 5, on October 4, on October 3rd. It comes with the recognition of, at the time, 75 years of apartheid, right? Like, that is the reality.
What you should be saying right now.
And I'm free Palestine too, right? It's just the timing. I know what it is. You're saying I support Hamas. I mean, that's what you're saying. Maybe not even intentionally, you know. But that
it might not be intentionally, but that is what it means.
Now, as I've explained in a previous video, the news break was quite vague at the time. So much of the breaking news was focused on the destruction of the Gaza wall and the escape of Gazans, not the mass atrocities. So hearing the great news of Gazan freedom, I and many others were quick to say, free Palestine. But for the most part, this reaction from two Israelis was understandable. For the most part.
Ethan, please learn more about this. Shut the f*** up.
What was not so understandable was Ethan's reaction and commentary in the following H3 podcast episode.
Emote mode ends and immediately someone comes in and has to fucking do this. Like, immediately.
Twitch streamer by the name Frogan.
I don't know if this is I guess this is turning into a drama that I can talk about. Is that this girl Frogan?
Frogan.
Oh, Frogan? Mm-hmm. That's what I'm saying. I don't even know how to say her name. I just followed her because you know, there was a lot of mutuals that were following her, and she seemed like a nice person, so that's why I followed her.
She was a mod for Hasan, and me and Lena are friends with her as well.
Okay. I just quietly unfollowed her, okay? I didn't like the tweets she was making. I thought they were, like, leaning too much towards pro-Hamas. And
AB's like, and we're friends with her as well.
Just didn't like it. I didn't want to see it. And so I quietly unfollowed her. I didn't make a big deal. I didn't say anything. But like, she got to turn it into this whole big thing that turns into a drama that's now being posted all over the internet. I'm sorry. It's a Twitter follow. It's not that serious, okay? First of all, and foremost, that face when one of your favorite content creators unfollows you for being pro-Palestine. Like, first of all, the framing of that is f***ed up.
Do you see that D is trying to leverage the situation to his advantage and is talking to Ethan behind the scenes planning on stream? You see his recent Reddits visited. Destiny's always there. I don't care.
Okay. Let's not even go there. You don't even know why I unfollowed you. You don't know. You don't have no information. We've never even talked. You said Ethan Klein unfollowed Frogan. Ethan Prob was like, this damn Arab supports Hamas. That's not funny. That's not funny at all. Like, the whole framing of this is really.
I try to tell him, like, this is literally, that is a fucking Destiny. Isn't that, I know this username. Isn't this like a Bonercelli fucking massive fan? Straight up, every time there's a LSF post, of me, it's that motherfucker. Wait, hold on. Why do I know a Redditor? Because this motherfucker has posted so many LSF clips of me.
Cruel. Ethan, I'll support the IDF. Refollow me. I don't support the IDF either. It's not funny. The reason I unfollowed her, because apparently she wants to know, is because of this tweet specifically and a few others. But this is the one that I was like, I don't want to see this anymore. She said, leftists preach and foam at the mouth at the thought of a revolution happening in America. But as soon as it happens in the...
Is the porn star James Dean still around? Been around since 2018, dog. How many alt accounts does this motherfucker have, you think?
The Middle East, what they're doing is wrong. She's implying that what Hamas is doing is right. I mean, she's basically all but saying it. She's saying, as soon as a revolution happens in the Middle East, then all of a sudden what they're doing is wrong. She's saying, in her opinion, that what they're doing is right.
You take her out?
A revolution.
Ethan once again speaks from the heart, saying, this was the last time I spoke about Israel, before once again bringing up his 2-year-old Notes app screenshot.
She says, I've only ever heard you talk about me supporting Palestine. Are you dumb? Like, how dare you even say that, you bag? Did you think about this before you wrote it? Shame on you. How dare you defend what you said? and to even come for me as if I don't support Palestinians. This is the last time I ever spoke on Israel. The Israel government is making me sick. Even if Hamas is operating out of civilian buildings, it doesn't justify the total destruction of that building. It's inhumane. Netanyahu is a piece of shit warmonger and needs to go. As a dual citizen, I love Israel and the Israeli people. They deserve a government that actually believes in peace and not force and violence. The ultra-right Jewish settlers are among the greatest provocateurs in the world. They're shameless, hateful, fueled by religious zeal, and enabled by the Israeli government. I wish the settling and repossession of Palestinian land would stop. I wish the bombing in Gaza would stop. Gazans deserve to live in a life free of fear. And for all the crimes Hamas has committed, we must always remember that they are not Palestine, which somehow you don't seem to understand either. The Israeli government holds all of the power, and it's on them to stop the violence and show a true willingness to peace. That's the last time I talked about Israel. Do you want to keep saying this shit about me, or do you want to apologize? Because it sounds to me like...
I think what's crazy about this is that, like, Ethan is very frustrated and very emotional in this moment, but doesn't recognize that, like, perhaps a Lebanese woman who's a hijabi in the United States of America could also be very emotional in this exact same moment. You know what I mean? Like, that's what's so... And the reality of the matter is, anti-Semitism is an unacceptable form of bigotry, whereas Islamophobia is a very acceptable form of bigotry. So being the bigger person in this situation, regardless of your feelings, is absolutely to not unload with a much larger audience on a person of this background. You know what I mean? This reaction to this video is precisely why Leftovers ended. Okay? Because it's no longer about an emotional subject, such as genocide, okay? But it's an emotional subject with an association of two communities that are at odds with one another and are very parasocially invested in the outcome, okay? That's it.